All right. Well, I'm very happy to have you. I think a little introduction for everybody. Kristi Emmons Jones, your mother is Dixie Locke, very well known as Elvis's first girlfriend. Met, I would say, what year again?
They met in 1953.
1953 in Memphis,
Yes.
Tennessee, of course.
Yep.
And one thing that I love about your book is how faith is kind of the center of their relationship. They met at church, they bonded over gospel music, they bonded over their own faith. Did your mother ever tell you any stories, other stories that maybe weren't mentioned in the book about the faith connection that her and Elvis shared?
Well, um, and thank you for acknowledging that, Megan, because I will tell you that's one of the reasons why Mom had not written her book sooner, because up until a few years ago, self-publishing was not really a known option. And so, Mom's really greatest fear was if she told her story and gave the rights uh, to writing a book, if she gave those rights over to someone else, she was really concerned that it would not convey the level of the fact that their relationship was very much faith driven. And so, fast forward to now, self publishing over the past, I would say, 10 years has become much more common and much more acceptable. So, when I was able to approach Mom about the fact that we can do this ourselves, we don't have to give up any of your story. It will only be what you want it to say and nothing more or nothing less. And so, with that, it did give her the confidence and the assurance of knowing that we would write the book from the standpoint that faith and family were things that were both very important to Elvis and my mother, and to their families, the Presleys and the Locks. So I'm really, really proud of the fact that we were able to present that story very much from a faith driven perspective. So I appreciate you acknowledging that right off the get go. Mom had many, many beautiful stories. As far as if there is something that stands out in my mind as far as what wasn't in the book, um, she had a very difficult time conveying the emotion that both she and Elvis felt when Mrs. Presley passed. When Gladys died, because my mother was very close to Gladys, almost like a mother-daughter relationship, and we all know how very much Elvis adored his mother. And so, we do talk about that in the book, but I will say that it was very emotional for her to try and bring to the reader the level of loss that both Elvis and my mother shared together, even though by that time, Gladys passed in 1958. And so by that time, Elvis and my mother had recognized that, their lives were going in completely different directions. So my mom and Elvis dated basically from 53 to 56. And then when Gladys passed in 1958, he reached out to my mother and said, I really need you. And my mother, of course, just made no hesitation in being there with him and Vernon, Mr. Presley, because she was so closely attached to that family. So I don't know if that's necessarily something that we didn't put into the book, because we do talk about
Mhm.
the funeral and what transpired that day with such significant loss of Gladys. But I will say that she found it very hard to articulate how difficult and how meaningful at the same time that was for both of them together.
That's really touching. But so it sounds like you were kind of the driving force behind your mother writing this book, by the two of you coming together to write this book.
Yes, actually, it's I always say that there are silver linings behind everything. And so when the pandemic caused all of our worlds to come to a screeching halt in early 2020, um, I really felt that God pressed upon my heart that I was to use that time with my mother to help her write her stories and preserve her memories. It was a very surreal experience for me. And I was also given the name of the book, Unlocked, was just basically given to me that day. And so I called my mom and dad, and I said, "Hey, can I come over to your house?" And no parent ever tells
Mhm.
their children no, don't come.
Yeah.
So they're like, "Yes, please come see us." And so I went out and I told my mom that day, I said, "I feel very led that I'm supposed to use this time to help preserve your memories and help write your
Mhm.
story." And her first response to me is, she said, "Kristi, everybody already knows my story."
Oh.
And I said, "Well, Mom, no, not everyone does." Um, and the fact of the matter is if we don't get it in writing and we don't preserve what it was like to be you as a teenager,
Yeah.
um, dating another teenager who was starting to become the Elvis Presley,
Yep.
if we don't get those memories preserved in writing, there's going to be a day that you're not here to tell it. And
Mhm.
so, if for no other reason than for our family history, I feel that it's very meaningful and very important that we do this. And I told her about the self-publishing concept. And I said, Mom, no one will have their hands in this but us. And that means that nothing will be said unless it's your it's your word, it's your story, it's with your blessing. And
Mhm.
so she said, "Well, if you will do this with me," she said, "the only other thing I want to do," is she wanted Priscilla's blessing, because she and Priscilla, if y'all have had a
Yes.
chance to read the book, she and Priscilla, as um, beautifully odd as it is, she and Priscilla became very close friends over the
Mhm.
years. And my mom did not want to pursue this without Priscilla's blessing.
Wow.
And I happened to be with those two ladies in person the day that my mom asked Priscilla about her thoughts on this endeavor.
Mhm.
And Priscilla was like, "Well, Dixie, first of all, yes, 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 you should have done this, years ago." And
Really.
she said, "But please let me write the foreword of the book,
Mhm.
um, in support of you." And so that was huge, and just
Yes.
gave my mom the peace of mind and the confirmation that this was the right thing for us to do. And so my COVID blessing
Mhm.
is that for the next 12 to 14 months, I spent some of the most quality special time with my mom and my sister, um, we had slumber parties. We found this, again, this is during COVID. So every hotel, almost everything, was shut down. We found this small bed and breakfast just across the state line in Mississippi that would sneak us in to their bed and breakfast. And my mom and my sister and I would go there to just sort of lock ourselves in, so that we would not have distractions. We wouldn't have, I mean, if any of you are writers or artists, you have to get into that zone. You have to get into that safe environment, your creative environment. And so that is really what allowed us to do this in such a special way. And it's really the most worthwhile thing I think I've ever done in my whole career. I'm just super, super blessed and super proud of it.
I love it. And I especially love your little blurb in the book where you get to write about, I feel like you had a bit of Elvis history, a part of your life, you getting to work at Graceland. I just, for you, what was that like getting to work at Graceland, getting to kind of, in a way, live the Elvis life like your mother did?
Megan, it's so interesting because I didn't, I mean, I knew growing up, I knew of my mother's dating Elvis, and that they went to prom together, but I did not know a lot of intricate details at all. My mom and dad were married 63 years. My dad was a city of Memphis firefighter. So, he was my hero growing up. And so I tell people, I'm like, it's not like we sat around the kitchen table talking about Elvis per se. So when Graceland did open for tours, it was in 1982. I know this always gives away my age, but that's okay. I had just graduated high school in 1982. And so I was sort of footloose and fancy free for the summer until I started college in the fall. And so my cousin, we were very close, my cousin and I. We lived, I would say, between 3 and 4 miles of Graceland. Wow. And so my cousin said, "Hey, Kristi, Graceland's hiring, part-time people for the summer. You want to go see if they'll give us a job?" And I'm like, "Sure." It was just sort of a casual, nonchalant idea. And so we go down to Graceland, and they hired both of us right there on the spot. But the funny thing is I did not say anything about my mother, who my mother was, nothing. And so they hired me as a tour guide. And within about 3 weeks, one day I got ready to leave at the end of the day, and I had a note attached to my time card. That's how long ago this was. We had time cards. And I had a note attached to my time card that Jack Soden wanted to see me before I left. And so if y'all know, Jack Soden is like the CEO of Elvis Presley Enterprises. So I was like, good Lord, what have I done to be called to his office? And so I did go to his office. He made small talk with me for a few minutes. And finally he leaned across his desk and he said, "Kristi, why haven't you told us who your mother is?" And I just sort of was taken aback. And I've said, "Well, Jack, because I wanted you to hire me for me, and not because of who my mother was." And he's like, "Well, that's a respectable answer, young lady." Yeah. And I was like, "Whoo, okay, good. I said the right thing." And then he's like, "But how do we get in touch with your mother?"
Oh.
And so it was really sweet. And I will tell you, from that day, Jack just became a endearing friend to our family.
That's
And
sweet.
called my mom, brought my mom and dad up to Graceland, gave them a private tour. And Jack was actually the person that was responsible for introducing my mother and Priscilla. So it just forged a very special relationship for many years to come. And it was, I'll tell you, it was such a fun place to work. It was, no one knew, like, that if you ever watched Field of Dreams, that the saying in that movie, if you build it they will come, if you build it they will come. And we're like, oh my gosh, are they going to come? Or when we open the doors,
Wow.
is anyone going to show up? And of course now, fast forward to, it's the most visited home in the world, I think second to the White House.
Mhm.
And so it was very exciting. We had, if you've been to Graceland recently, so now, you do the tour with a headset.
Mhm.
But for the first however many years, you had a personal guide
Wow.
who took you through various segments of the tour. So it was fun. That was really when my eyes were opened about the magnitude of Elvis Presley and
Wow.
what this man had accomplished in a young 42 years of living.
Mhm.
And then, holy cow, my mother was right in the cusp of his stardom. So
Yeah.
that was really when, it began to become so much more significant and real for me, was during that time working at Graceland. Because, like I said before, my home life was my home life.
Yeah.
It involved around my mom and dad and my siblings and my school and, all of the things that would be typical of a teenager. So, but then when I went to work at Graceland is really when I began to understand the significance of who he was and the significance of the role my mom had played in that.
Wow. So your mother, apparently she didn't talk a whole lot about Elvis with you growing up.
She really didn't,
Mhm.
and she was very private about it. She never wanted to draw attention to herself. And and the older I've gotten, I find that to be very respectful. She was just always very respectful of everyone's feelings.
I think your mother is a very, just getting to read her story, you can just see how amazing of a woman she really was. And the one thing that she just seems very, like you said, very private. So it kind of struck me, like it was a different side of her when I hear that, she was kind of the one that in a way pursued Elvis, going to,
She,
just very casually like, oh, we're going to go skating, making sure he
right.
hears it.
I know, when I look back and I think about, trying to put myself in her shoes as a teenager, I'm like, wow, she was pretty clever, first of all,
Yes.
because she said that she and Elvis had made eyes at each other, but she quickly realized that he was just painfully shy
Hmm.
and that he would not be the person to approach her. And so yeah, I thought it was pretty ingenious that she decided to speak loud enough as she and her girlfriends started planning to go roller skating the next
Hmm.
weekend, and hoping that Elvis was in earshot of her and would hear her. And he did, and then he did show up. So she said at that point she knew that um there was some chemistry
Hmm.
between them. And she said that Elvis was not a good skater.
Oh.
Um, she said he was making a valiant effort, but she said she suggested they just go kick their skates off and sit and talk.
Mhm.
And that's what they did. And she's really, by the end of that night, um they had forged a very special bond that led to, almost 3 years of being together.
And then another thing, you talk about their bond, and it's very evident, I feel like, the kind of relationship they had when you get to read the love letters that she actually wrote to him. And
Yeah.
they're so beautiful, and it is so reminiscent of being a teenager in 1950s. And then also it's amazing that Gladys kept them for all those years. And I just have to know,
I know.
does Graceland, obviously they still exist. So does
Yes.
Graceland have them? So they're stored away in their archives. Right?
Yes, they are. And it was a funny story, because when the letters were found, which was, not that many years ago, but they were found in one of Gladys's handbags in a wallet of Elvis's. So the letters were in Elvis's wallet, and Elvis's wallet was in Gladys's handbag.
Mhm.
So they found these, and they called my mom to say, "You're not going to believe what we found, these letters." And my mother was like, "Oh my gosh, really? Wow." And she said, "Well, when can I come down and pick those up?" And my the Graceland family, and I use that word in all truth, because they are like a family to us. They have always treated us with such love and dignity. But they're like, "Oh, Dixie, this is property of Graceland now. These letters, they're property of Graceland, but we'll be glad to give you a photocopy." And she's like, "Well, yeah, I would kind of like to remember
Yeah.
what it all I said, before you start publicly showing them
Mhm.
again." And so it was really cute, but we got the biggest
Wow.
kick out of reading those, because Megan, like you
Mhm.
said, it's like you just
Yeah.
put yourself. I think most of the people on are female, but it's like
Yes.
I can just put myself into that
Mhm.
study hall when I'm supposed to be doing, English or science
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And instead, I can't think of anything except, this first boyfriend I've ever had. And writing him a note to say how much I can't wait to see it. And so that was really what we were wanting to bring to the reader,
Mhm.
is not and I don't mean this like to say not just another book about Elvis, because there's not just another book about Elvis. Any book about Elvis is important.
Mhm.
But what we wanted it to be was more about being the teenage girl dating this teenager, what it was
Mhm.
like to be her. Because I think that for many of us as females, you know, that's what you want to understand. It's like, wow, what would it have been like if I could have been her?
Yeah.
What would it have been like to be getting picked up from school with, this young man waiting out in the parking lot in his, Crown
Mhm.
Electric truck? Or what would it have been like when, you're hanging out at the park and he's playing on his guitar and singing silly songs, or
Yep.
getting ready to go to prom. I mean, we really wanted to bring it more from the perspective of what it was like as that teenage girl, watching all of this and being a part of all of this dynamic.
And I think where I really get the sense of what it was like to be that teenage girl was the night of their prom. And it, the whole chapter just covering the prom, it is my favorite because it's so detailed and I feel like I'm her. And I love the
Yes.
stories. You also talked about how close, the Locks and the Presleys were. And Gladys Presley taking your mother to go pick out her prom dress. Just I just have
Yes.
to know, like, again, does she keep any of these mementos like from over the years with Elvis? Whether it's a prom dress, something he gave her.
Yeah, over the years, I will say, we have we have a few things. The prom dress is not one of them. I wish that it were, but I don't really know exactly the ins and outs of that.
Mhm.
But she does have, several of the photos. My mom has, um, gosh, and I don't know if at some point it will be the right thing for me to share or not, but my mom has a diary that she
Oh,
kept during the time that they dated, and she gifted that to me, and man, it's just so precious, what
mhm.
she writes and what she's feeling, um when when he's starting to travel, for
Mm.
longer and longer periods of time, how she's missing him, um how she wonders if he thinks of her. It's just all of the things that I think any of us would feel,
Yeah.
um in a young love.
Mhm.
So but yeah, there are a few mementos that she has kept and saved, but through the course of time, a lot of them have been either lost or damaged,
Mhm.
or um there was even an instance when a few things got stolen. So
Oh,
you just try to, again, exactly to the point of why it's so important to preserve these memories as
absolutely.
in writing, because there are very few permanent artifacts
Mhm.
still left.
That's amazing. And especially it's very touching to know that, she kept a diary all this time. And you mentioned like the specific time when Elvis started traveling, he was away from her more often. Like that's obvious the time
Mhm.
where they started to grow apart. But I also have to know
Yeah.
before we turn it over to our Q&A time, did you and your mom watch the Elvis movie from 2022? Because obviously she is featured in the movie.
Yes, we did, and we were actually very honored to have been invited to the premiere when it was
Oh,
launched at the guest house at Graceland. Um, Priscilla, Austin Butler, Tom Hanks, Baz Luhrmann. I mean, the entire cast and crew were there that evening.
mhm.
It was beyond anything that I had ever been part of.
Yeah.
And but before we went to the screening, I talked with my mom and dad, and I said, before we go, I said, just two or three things that I want us to keep in mind. Number one, it's Hollywood,
Mhm.
okay, and it's a movie, so there will be most likely things that are not. It's not a documentary, okay,
Mhm.
so they will take liberties to make things a little bit more sensationalized, or make them more eccentric on camera. And,
Mhm.
I had followed enough of Baz Luhrmann's previous films that I knew his style would be
Yeah.
have many artistic liberties.
Mhm.
So, and the other thing is that I reminded them this movie is also being told from the viewpoint of Colonel Parker.
Yeah.
It was almost narrated as if Colonel Parker were telling the story. So I said, let's go in with an open mind and understand that those things will most likely happen. And so we did go in with that mindset.
Mhm.
I was um, it was a very emotional experience for
Yep.
me, and my whole family, to be honest. And I say that in a beautiful way.
Mhm.
I had to watch it 2, 3, and 4 more times to
Mhm.
really process so many things that the movie stood for. Um, the only two things I will say that mom really, um, the two things that really stood out to her were that, number one, she said she never knew, that she never saw Gladys drink
Wow.
alcohol, and number two, that she never heard Elvis cut, to say curse words.
Mhm.
And so, I'm like, well, mom, you know what you know.
Yep.
And again, we just have to understand that, it's a movie, it's Hollywood. Um, and you take from it what
Mhm.
resonates with you. But I loved the movie overall.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most incredible things that that movie did was, for I think for many of you young ladies,
Mhm.
um, it brought so much more exposure to younger
Yeah.
generations, that probably would have said, no, I'm not an Elvis fan, no, I don't
Mhm.
like Elvis. And now all of a sudden they saw him in a different light.
Yep. Well,
So
again,
I think it was phenomenal.
I loved it, and I just thought it was an amazing part to include your mother in Elvis's story. But
Yeah,
one
yeah.
it it was out of everybody who was part of Elvis's life, and there were many, to include your mother, I think really stood out for me. But one last thing before we turn over to Q&A, I want to know, writing this book, writing with your mother and your little sleepovers that you had, was there something that you learned from your mother that you would never forget?
Whoa. Um, gosh. She has been such a force, in my life for, I mean, my existence. And I think that one of the one of the most significant things, as I listen to her tell the story, and I was, writing constantly or recording constantly to listen to her, was how impressed I was to think about a young woman at barely 18 years old. I mean, well, they were just she was barely 16 when she and Elvis met, but by the time she was 18 years old, that she had the fortitude to know within herself that his dreams and his life were very different than what she wanted for her life. And she was able to differentiate the two. I mean, I've talked with my sister, I've talked with my girlfriends, and I'm like, I think at that point I would have been like, hey, I'm not sure where this is going, but I'm just
Yeah.
gonna ride it out and see. I mean, I think that would
Mhm.
be the typical mindset, you
It
know.
would be.
But she was so grounded in
Mhm.
who she knew she was as a young woman, and was able to say, listen, I know this is your dream, and I know that's your gift, and I know
Mhm.
that is where you need to be, but that's not my dream. That's not my life. And that she was able to stay true to herself at such a young age, that is really one of the most impressive things that I ever saw and learned from my mom. And if you do read the book, there is a little a segment, when I speak at the beginning of the book,
Mhm.
and it's one of the lessons that my mother instilled in me early on. And she would ask me every day, do you know who you are? And do you know what you stand for? Every day.
Yep.
She started asking me that from the time I left to go to kindergarten. And, I was like, that's a strange question to ask, a 5-year-old. I mean, I stood
Yeah.
for recess and paper dolls and, you know, sippy cups. I mean, I don't know. I was 5 years old, but without fail, from that point up until I was 18, 19 years old, she would ask me every day before we parted, do you know who you are and do you know what you stand for? And I have come to draw on that in my life every day, because I think she did know who she was, and she did
Mhm.
know who she stood for, even it even in as a young woman in her first love, she knew to stay grounded to what was true to her. And I think that's really the most significant lesson that I took from her.
I just love getting to, I feel like I learned more about her. I feel like I get to know her and I love every bit of it. I love the book.
I'm so glad that you were able to join us tonight to speak with us. I loved your mother's book. We have obviously, all of us, read many, many books about Elvis. And I really felt like this book let us see who he really was.
Yeah.
Good.
Before the fame, before, other things came in to affect his personality, but who he really was.
Yeah.
At his core. And that was just a gift. So I'm so thankful that you were able to do this with your mom. This was kind of, the question I have is kind of along the same lines. I actually have two questions. One is for my husband. But the first question is along the same lines. As what Megan was asking, when you were working with your mom and having the sleepovers and the bed and breakfast with you and your sister, that sounds like a ton of fun, first of all. But was it a lot of laughing, a lot of fun most of the time? Were there times when she were was more emotional about certain aspects of the book that you talked about, or was it pretty much so far in the past and so far removed from her life now that she was able to stay pretty upbeat about the whole story? So I guess, what was her reaction to sharing the story with you most of the time?
Yeah. That's a great question, Kristi. And most of the time, I mean, and you're right, there were lots of laughs, and just funny moments, special moments, for us to just be together as mother and daughters. But it, if you and I'm sure you noticed, when you read the book, there is really little to no mention about her experience when Elvis passed.
And I was very
And I
thankful
will huh?
I was very thankful for that.
Yeah. She could not. Um, she did not want to go there. It was very emotional for her.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, really the only reference that is made about that is when Elvis passed. Vernon, his dad, did call our house and ask my mother to come to the funeral. And she did not give him an answer right away. In my mother's typical fashion, she said, I need to think about it, which translates to her, it means I need to pray about it.
Mhm.
And so she responded the next day and she said, I want to remember him how I knew him, not all of the hype of the media, not people blowing out, his lifestyle, his weight, his this or his that. She was very private and very protective about how she knew him and how she remembered him. And so when we got to that point in our conversations, she was very emotional. And she, people have asked me before, do I think that my mother has any regrets? And I don't know that I would say it was a regret, but I do think that there's a piece of her that never felt like she got complete closure. And that maybe if she had gone to that, if she had gone to that funeral, that it would have given her a different perspective. I don't know. But that was the one thing that she just really couldn't bring herself to share a lot with us. And she said, and I just don't think I want it in the book. And I'm like, then we don't, then that's the end of the story. We won't do it. So, yeah,
And
that was the main.
That allowed us as a reader, we've talked about this before, really enjoy a lot of the books, but they all have that ending that is just just like mourning over and over again every time you get to the end of the book. And that was one of the true gifts of this book, to allow the reader to appreciate Elvis for his true self.
Yeah.
And for the part that your mother played in his life, and not dwell on the negative at the end, which was a really gift to us to read it that way. So we really appreciate it. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you for saying that.
Thank you. My second question is, my second question was for my husband. He gets to hear so much about my Elvis Book Club and all things Elvis, and he doesn't, not typically interested, but he acts like he is. But the one story that I shared with him from this book that really got his interest was the high school ring story about being thrown out in the field and then never found. And has your mom ever mentioned, like, to you where? I mean, like, not that I need you to tell us that, but do you have any clue what part of Memphis or where it would have been, this field that she's talking about?
Yes. I mean, if you read a lot in the book, there's an area that was called Gaston Park, where they hung out a lot. And she recalls that it was in that area, but so much, just as any city, things have been torn down, rebuilt. So I don't know if she would have ever been able to physically take me back to where it was, but it is so strange to me that, of all this time and all the people that are constantly digging and uncovering things, that it's never been found.
I know, that was fascinating to my husband.
I know, it's fascinating to me too. And, and I can just picture it happening in my mind.
Oh yeah.
The little spat, and well, here, you have your ring back, and him just stalking it across the field. And, and then, within 30 minutes, so then they are not mad at each other anymore. And, oh, let's kiss and make up. But now we can't find the ring. And, and one of the things that my mother said to me too was, which they were very poor. Both families were very poor at that time. And, my mother said, our parents had to rake and scrape to pay for those senior class rings. It was like the most expensive thing that possession that they had at the time. What
Mhm.
was a class ring. And so she's like, the fact we never recovered it, she's like, we were devastated, not just
Wow.
only what it symbolized, but the mere fact of what their parents had done to buy the ring in the first place.
Yes.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's, I don't know, girl. It's a mystery. I hope one day I
Can
would
you
love
just,
to know.
yeah, yeah,
But I had
yeah.
never thought about it. I mean, you're so right talking about, and I believe was it your mother's class ring that her father had to pawn his watch for.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, to think about, you have to pawn something just to get your kid this class ring, and here goes Elvis, something that his parents worked very hard for, and he just, chucks it across the park.
Yeah,
That
I know.
it,
Yeah,
it is.
and Megan, the fact that you bring that up, I, I'm I feel sure that you all know that my mom passed in December,
Yes.
right? December 19th. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I've been going through some of the things with my dad, and he gave me my mom's class ring.
Wow.
So yeah, just I was just beside myself. So I do have her class ring, but I don't know the whereabouts of Elvis's. But man, what a story!
It is
Yeah.
quite a story. I guess maybe we'll finish on good notes. I asked you what is something you learned about your mother, learned from your mother that you still hold close to you today. What is maybe your favorite memory? I told you my favorite memory that your mother shared was the night of their prom. Is there
Hmm.
something that your mother retold to you that was your favorite? Something that you thought was such a magical moment, something that was just so sweet and so reminiscent of, again, being a teenager in 1950.
Yeah, well, I mean, so many uh special things. But Megan, for me, it was prom also.
Mhm.
Um, for any of us girls, um, at that point in our life, I feel like prom is the most magical thing that we have experienced at that point in our lives. Um, I mean, there are other magical moments come, but I think at that point, that's probably the most magical that we've had. So I was like you. It was funny when we were writing that portion of the book, mother kept thinking, she said, we were talking like, no, mom, I just have some questions, you know, like, what were you feeling? And, what time did you get up? And who did your hair? And what jewelry did you wear? And where did you get your shoes? And she's like, why? She's like, I haven't thought about all of this in so long. I said, I know, but I want to feel it. I
Yeah.
mean, I just wanted to feel everything about that entire experience. And so for me, that was it. That was the magical moment
Mhm.
when she talked about, going to the window and looking out the window when he was driving up. I could just feel that. Watching him get out and how beautiful he looked. And then, when he came in and the family's making, chatter, and she walks in the room and there's silence. I could just feel that
Mhm.
of, wow, magic. Just intense magic. So that was definitely the big highlight for me. Um, Maybe one of the more unassuming things that I loved was really seeing. One of the things that I really loved was seeing the closeness that my mother developed between Gladys and her, because as you know, as we've all learned, Gladys was choosy, if that's a good word. I think, she was very selective of who she let into her heart, of who she let into her life. And when I started seeing the closeness that my mom had with Gladys, it really opened up the fact to me that what Elvis and my mother had was so special, that Elvis's mother loved it too. And so that was really one of the most intricate pieces for me.
I just loved all of it. It's all around, I think, a good book. It's like what Kristi said. It shows you the true Elvis. It shows you who he was before the rise of fame. It shows you how he was with his mother, which is something we don't get a whole lot with other Elvis books. Gladys, passed very early on in his career. I love getting to see him, I would say, more in his natural element, where he just gets to be him. And I think that's the highlight of the book. And I just
too.
I'm so glad that I know we read the book in December, but it was amazing to have you on, and I'm so happy that we got to do this finally.
Yeah, and listen, thank you all for having me. And I said this to Megan when she and I first logged in, but for those of you that maybe didn't hear it, I wanted to say thank y'all for your flexibility. I know we were supposed to have done this in March. Turns out that I was having a big birthday, and my husband and my sister surprised me on that same Sunday with a sweet, beautiful, wonderful party. And so I'm texting Megan and I'm like, I don't think I can get out of this really, in a timely fashion. So I'm glad that we could do it tonight. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. So, maybe tonight was better anyway.
Well, I'm glad we got to do it. And it was so fun to talk to you and listen to all the sweet, wonderful stories that you got to share with your mother. And again, just thank you so much for doing this with us.
You are so welcome. It's been my pleasure. And if y'all get to Memphis anytime, and if I'm available and I can meet you for a coffee or a lunch, just please reach out to me. I'm so blessed by the Elvis community, and it's just a beautiful thing. So if I can ever meet you in person or stay in contact, I'm available.
And again, if nobody's picked up a copy, absolutely should. I believe the place to get it is Graceland's website, Shop Graceland. Am I correct on that?
Yes, Megan, they can get it there. And I can also, when we get off the call, I can send you a link to my page directly. If y'all did want to order a copy through me, if you want me to sign it, I'm happy to do that and ship it out to you. It's the same price, whether you order it at Graceland or you order it through me, but I'm happy to autograph it if you want that done through my page. So I'll give you that information. But yeah, I just appreciate all of you helping to, preserve Elvis's memory, share it with the people that haven't been exposed yet. And just thank you for being a part of carrying on my mom's legacy as well. It means so much.
Thank you. I thank you for taking the time to preserve your mom's story for us.
My pleasure. I hope you ladies have a good rest of your evening. And Megan, you reach out if you need anything at all.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.